Hello folk. So I could not get the thing to do with the Facebook working or whatever. But I'm just going live on the YouTube and I'll just share the YouTube link. So I'll just get around to doing that if I can figure out how to. It's just ridiculous because I personally think they've blocked me or something. Which is quite unfortunate. So I'll just wait on you guys coming in. And of course, once you guys come in and that's that sorted, I can actually put the live feed out. How is it I get the live feed link or whatever on YouTube? Where do I find it on YouTube? And I'll just share it on Facebook. Then I'll get around to speaking about the difference. I think that's it. I think this is it. I'll just fucking share this. It's just... It's frustrating to have to do this, folk. Because otherwise I would have been streaming straight to both of them. So you just caught it right. That's it. Okay. There we go. I'll just share it there on my Facebook. Anybody can find me that. Righty. So let's get straight to it. As you see, Neville seems to be working on YouTube. Yeah, I mean it's I don't get it myself, and it's just going like through Restream. It'll connect to YouTube, but it's just trying to, you know, when it's trying to connect to Facebook, it's just not connecting. I think it did it last night, but then it cut the internet off and just something seemed very odd. And you know myself, I don't trust big tech, especially Facebook. Anyway, so I was asked the question, and it was about corporatism, with regards to the period, and we're speaking about that of the robber barons, the myth of the robber barons, and of course, a lot of people confuse big business, and they conflate that with corporatism. They conflate big corporations, and they conflate, you know, the giant trusts with that of corporatism, and that's not corporatism. Corporatism is a system that basically is all based on special interest favours. And in the late 19th century, you saw these giant trusts and corporations, but they were the ones who were benefiting the consumers. So, corporatism is basically a system that's based on protectionism. And this is one of the things that differentiates corporatism from capitalism. Because corporatism is about rewarding failure and punishing success. So it just so happened to be that in the late 19th century, the one who was being protected was, of course, the very small business people who could not compete. Now you might ask the question, and of course I was asked this question in general, and that is that, well, surely with these businesses that cannot compete, surely these small business people, surely they should have a chance. You have to understand that in a capitalist system it does not guarantee success. You cannot guarantee companies' success, because that's what results in incompetency. In other words, You can't guarantee money in the pockets of people just for simply running business. Unfortunately, that's what government subsidies do. That's what resulted in hundreds of private companies facing bankruptcy. Because there's incompetency that follows it. Because they know they're guaranteed money in their pocket simply just for running business. You shouldn't be guaranteed success. You shouldn't be guaranteed money. It's the only way you can ensure efficiency of the operation of business. And when it came down to that of these small business people in the late 19th century, they were inefficient. Now, the inefficiency, those were the same businesses that would charge higher prices. Right? So they were basically the ones who would shaft the consumer. And as a result of them attempting to shaft the consumer and, of course, not being able to compete because they weren't as successful, they were seeking special interest favours by lobbying Congress for those special interest favours. And that was the real rationale behind the antitrust law legislation of that period. Because the narrative was in the late 19th century was that these giant trusts came along, dominated the marketplace completely, they used predatory pricing to get there, and they shafted the consumer by driving up the prices and costs, etc. And because of their monopolies, they were able to put out dangerous products. Now, none of that is based on the truth. First of all, there's never been a monopoly to ever stem from predatory pricing. Predatory pricing simply means that they slightly reduced that of the, prices below their competition, and then once they theoretically wipe out their competition, they would drive the prices back up, and they drive everything up and shaft the consumer. But that isn't based in the real world of predatory pricing. Like I've mentioned before, of the example of Herbert Dow's chemical company, there was no predatory pricing. That's ever resulted in that is the creation of a monopoly. The consumer price index between 1840 to 1900 continuously dropped. So of course, the only way that you could create a monopoly is by restricting productive output. And of course, 17 such industries that were accused of holding monopolies saw their productive output increase by 175% between 1880 to 1890 alone, which tells you that they were not monopolies. Now, these giant trusts who were accused, a big difference between being accused of holding monopolies and that of the reality. They never held monopolies, but they were being accused of supposedly holding monopolies. Those giant trusts were the very trusts who were greatly benefiting the consumer. They were providing cheaper costs. They were providing service that would greatly benefit the consumer. That's why the consumer price index continuously fell, because there's a higher level of productive output. We saw that with Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller was accused of holding a monopoly. Again, in 1869 it would cost more than 30 cents per barrel of oil, and continuously, even after owning 90% share of the market by 1879, the price would plummet. It would only cost 5.9 cents per barrel of oil by 1897, just before the turn of the 20th century. So, Rockefeller never held a monopoly. A monopoly, by definition, means that an industry, a company, would own 100% share of the market, that there would be no competition, and that they would drive the prices up. After all, what is the main reason why people fear and despise monopolies? It's quite funny. I had a socialist the other day there trying to argue with me and debate me on the definition of a monopoly, and he's saying, why can't a company that drives prices down be regarded as a monopoly? Well, simple, you're benefiting the consumer. How can you benefit consumers and regard that as monopolies? That isn't... We all know the main reason why people despise monopoly creation. We know. You can even hear it today by people complaining about American healthcare costs. We know. We're not stupid. So, monopoly by definition means that the prices would be driven up, and by the mainstream narrative of the so-called robber barons, they would shaft the consumer and they would put out dangerous products by their narrative, because they can do so because they've got no competition. That's the mainstream narrative. That's the narrative that they used about Rockefeller. Or he can just, do whatever he likes to the consumer. He can just drive prices up. And that's what he was accused of. They claimed that Rockefeller in the 1870s, using rebates and then using predatory pricing, the mainstream narrative claimed that Rockefeller drove the prices up and shafted the consumer. Did he? No. The mainstream narrative went as far as to say they were putting out dangerous products. Were they? No. So, they were the ones benefiting the consumers. The ones who were not, the ones who were charging the higher prices, the ones who were shafting the consumers, were the very business people who were incompetent to begin with. They were the very businesses who could not compete with the giant trusts. Now, people automatically get it drilled into their head. They seem to think as soon as they hear big business or giant trust, the keyword giant, they seem to think that means corporatism. And it doesn't. In fact, big business is very beneficial to the economy. They're quite beneficial to the consumers. Let me just look at a few of the comments. As you said, and socialist claims government monopoly is not a monopoly. Exactly, it's government-run services are monopolies, and that is very right for pointing that out. You're absolutely spot on, mate. And as you say, what is your view or take on anarcho-capitalism? Don't know why this thing's... Can capitalism work without government? Oh, of course it can. I mean, without question. I mean, capitalism is a workable system. That doesn't need government to make it work. It can. The market can regulate itself. We've even got the history of that, even on safety regulations, etc. It's actually government's regulation that created the problem. Anyway, so in terms of corporatism's about protectionism. And the difference between capitalism and corporatism is capitalism's about the separation of the economy from government, and capitalism's about rewarding success and punishing failure. I'll get around to explaining that with the example of Rockefeller. Whereas corporatism is about protectionism. It's about protecting losses, right? About rewarding losses, about rewarding failure and punishing success. A good example of that corporatism was the banking crisis. Because regardless of what the bad banks would do, they were always there being protected by government, is the government would force the taxpayer to collectively, keyword there is collectively, to force people of society collectively, subordinating individuals' rights, collectivism, forcing society collectively to pay the tax to fund the losses of them, to socialise their losses. So it's socialism for the rich. And that subsidisation to protect failure, to prop failure up, it's exactly what leads to legally protected fraud. It's exactly what leads to incompetence. And you could look at the 19th century of the United States and you see the hundreds of examples of businesses that would all pretty much face the very problems that they would. Because hundreds of these private companies, you look at the turnpike industry, look at the steamship industry, look at the railroad industry, hundreds of those companies would face bankruptcy. Again, I'll just check out a few of these comments. Recently subbed, good to be here. Thank you, Vok. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you again. And yeah. So, this is the thing with regards to the private companies. There's a strong difference between the political entrepreneurship to that of the market entrepreneurship. Take, for example, the difference between James J. Hill and the railroad industry to that of the hundreds of companies. And it wasn't just a few, but it was these hundreds of railroad companies that would all face bankruptcy. No coincidence either. One such industry company was the North Pacific Railroad Company that tried to build a few railroads, and of course it was very incompetent because it was guaranteed quite a large sum. If I remember right, they were guaranteed more than $25,000 or something like that. I'm pretty sure I wrote a blog about it. I'm going to create a blog, by the way, a proper blog. Something better than the kind of shoddy one I've got at the moment that's only got about 1 or 2 posts up. But I'm going to try and create one. I don't know if I can get it in WordPress or whatever. However, this company was basically guaranteed a large sum of money for every 1 mile of track that it would build. So what's the inevitable consequence of the subsidies? It's just going to rush into building it. Because at the end of the day, they're guaranteed a sum of money for simply just doing something. So if they build something in such a way, if they take a longer route, they're going to make more money from it because of the subsidies. Because they're basically guaranteed that. Right? So they're not really interested in what materials they use or how long it would take to build. They're not really caring about efficiency. And why should they? I mean, they're guaranteed a large sum of money for every 1 mile of track that they would build. So what resulted in that was incompetence. When they finished the railroads, they were very, very poorly built. I think they faced damages and had to, I think it was something to do with being built across ice or something. It created a very big problem, and again they had to seek money to try and repair. Of course, Congress would eventually tell them to go do one, and the company, and I think it was 1873, would face the bankruptcy. So the point of that being is the fact that this is the problem with corporatism. Because in this corporatist system you have today, it's a system of rewarding failure. So it rewards incompetency. It doesn't punish it. It basically says to you, oh, you can just do business any way you like, don't worry about your losses, we'll force the taxpayer to pay for it. And that epitomises even government-run services. Like the monopoly, and Mike rightly pointed it out as he stated about this of a government-run service. He's absolutely right in what he says, because the British NHS is exactly like that. You know, regardless of the failure of the NHS, it's always guaranteed that the taxpayer will bail it out, because it must be protected at all costs. That's the problem with government-run services. It's not like a free market where you would face losses and the inevitable possibility of facing liquidation and losing your business. Instead, government can simply, guarantee success, and it's not supposed to be like that. It's not success anyway, but the whole meaning of trying to guarantee success is basically propping failure up, only to waste more taxpayers' money. There's the underlying issue, because you're wasting and you're making the taxpayer poorer and poorer just for the sake of propping that failure up. As he says, what would society or country would you point towards as a truly capitalist society, not a mixed economy or presence of corporatism? Are there and is there any countries in the current time? Well, that's a good question, and unfortunate as it is to say at the current time, I think the closest that you would probably get to is Singapore. And as you know, it's not exactly, truly, no one's saying it's 100% free, but in the question of scale, it's arguably the most capitalist at the current time. Hong Kong, unfortunately, over a period of time since 1997 at the very least, had moved in the wrong direction. It faced its problems and stuff. Typically what defines a free market, typically what defines a capitalist system, we're not talking about in the purest form and stuff like that, but what typically defines capitalism as a free market, and that would mean a market that's left be for prices to regulate itself, for there to be free and voluntary exchange in the marketplace, for there to have free trade like Hong Kong had, and basically to have an economy that is strongly left be to regulate itself. Now, like for example, the classical liberalism, they support minimalist government with low levels of government regulation. That's typically, a free market. So I think the only thing that was kind of against that of what is required of a free market is interest rates to be set freely in the marketplace, and of course they're to basically be free market money. So you have to have money that's determined by the people in order for there to be an actual proper free market. And unfortunately in this world today, because of fraudulence, the entire world has been forced with fraudsters who forced upon the world currency, so that's something that needs to be addressed. There's something that needs to be removed, but that covers that. So with regards to corporatism, and it relates to all of that, and going back, and like I said, with corporatism, it being a protectionist system that, tries to guarantee success. In other words, it just props failure up. And because of the fact it's a special interest system, government will always pick and choose winners and losers. And government will always go where the money is. So it just so happens to be in today's economy under corporatism. Yes, the giant corporations, just so happen to be the ones who can afford to pay people to find loopholes in government regulation, to lobby for more government regulation, to stamp out competition. And this is one of the things that a lot of people confuse about corporatism. Corporatism does not seek to deregulate the economy. Instead, it's a system where they seek to get government to lay on more government regulation. That way it weighs down the smaller competitors, because the heavier and heavier the government regulation becomes, the more complicated the regulation becomes. You know, your average people are not going to be able to sit down and look through it all, and the smaller business people cannot afford the heavier costs of government regulation. They cannot afford to pay people to find loopholes in the government regulation, whereas big corporations can. So they've got obviously a competitive advantage in that regard. And that is basically what leads to the monopoly creation through government's interference. And it's a very, very, big problem. But mostly from the very fact of its protectionism that results in the very issue where failure's been propped up. Now, no one is saying that after the 1860s it was, truly free market. Because unfortunately, since Abraham Lincoln, there was the creeping corporatism, shall we say. But to a varying degree, you got to see a hint of capitalism to an extent, not to do with the internal improvements, in other words, the corporate subsidies, not to do with that. Not to do with any of the protectionist tariffs. However, when you look at the story of Rockefeller, John Davison Rockefeller was a very, very intelligent man, and he became successful not only because he was an accountant by trade. He's a very intelligent man. He was utterly obsessed with efficiency. And the whole thing with Rockefeller was he became so successful off of the back of that, because there's many strategies that he would use that would, put him far ahead of his competition. But the point being is the fact that the businesses, the ones that were in competition with him at the time, those who were very wasteful were those who were being punished. In other words, and it's all to do with the laws of supply and demand. Because in 1859, when the oil industry would, properly kick off in that area, where they would start drilling for oil, because they used to take it from, Wales, right? Until, of course, they started drilling in the ground and stuff like that, because then they would discover a new way. And of course, you had the crude oil, and the crude oil used to get dumped. I think it was about between 40 to about 60 odd % that these companies would just dump of crude oil, right? So they were very, very wasteful. Rockefeller was having none of that. He flat out refused any sort of waste whatsoever. So that was actually the very reason why he was so successful. Because the reality is, it costs you more to use more resources. And in the laws of supply and demand, because the oil refinery industry was such a profitable business, well, it just so happened to be that this would attract competition. So hundreds and hundreds of other oil refinery companies would enter the market. They would jump at the chance, because they're thinking to themselves, we could make good money here. However, the larger the number grows in terms of providers, companies that is, well, there's going to be a higher level of productivity, a higher level of productive output. And by the turn of about the 1870s, the end of that decade, you would see the cost of a barrel of oil drop by about 50%. Right? You imagine that. Imagine what that would cause to these, these other companies. They're going to face big losses. They're going to face, the harsh reality that their business is going to face big losses from that. Because they weren't as smart as Rockefeller. Rockefeller found ways to save money, to cut costs, because he was just obsessed with efficiency, and he would save money from doing it. One fine example, from all of his other cost-cutting, intelligent things that he would do, but one small example, they used to store the oil in these barrels, in wine barrels, but they weren't efficient. They would leak. And again, Rockefeller was utterly obsessed with efficiency. Rockefeller says to his employees, he bought his own forest, but of course he got to that position through all of his other efficient means. But he bought his own forest, and he says to his employees, I want you to produce for me barrels of oil, barrels that would be more efficient, that would be of better quality, and would be of cheaper cost. Now, it was about $3 a barrel, in terms of the costs for all the other companies, because, they would get it from this other company or whatever. And the barrels weren't really reliable, plus the fact sometimes they weren't able to gain access to the barrels. So the periods left without, and of course the dumping of the crude oil, etc. It was very wasteful, very costful to those businesses. So what Rockefeller did was of course, the fact that it was costing $3 a barrel, he got his employees to produce, his own barrels. And he managed, as a result of that, he managed to reduce the cost of a barrel down from $3 to 96 cents. Now, you imagine how much you're saving in money over hundreds and thousands of barrels of oil. You're saving a lot of money. A hell of a lot of money. That's the very reason why Rockefeller was so profitable and far ahead of most of his competitors, through his own intelligence. But in the real world of a free market, competition always comes along. And the reason I give this example is because these hundreds of, these other oil refinery companies, they were all going under. They were all facing big losses. And those were the very businesses who were very wasteful, who were very inefficient, who were very incompetent. That's what capitalism does. It punishes failure and it rewards success, and that's how it's supposed to be. Now, who is it that benefits the most from the efficient competitors? It's the consumer. I mean, after all, like I said earlier on, it would cost more than 30 cents per barrel of oil in 1869, but it would only cost 5.9 cents per barrel of oil by 1897. So there you can see from that prime example that the consumer was becoming far richer. Society as a whole was becoming wealthier because of these big business people, because of the likes of your Rockefellers. Right, so don't confuse corporatism with that of giant corporations, or shall we say just giant business. It's not really The main issue isn't really to do with big business. The main issue is the system itself that's in place, that's anti-capitalist, that's anti-free market, that's protectionist at its root. And it just so happened to be that with regards to certain small business people who knew that they could not compete, they knew they were not as competent, they needed government, they needed to lobby for special interest favours to protect them from that. Right? So in other words, they basically wanted a foothold in the market to dominate a specific area, but they needed government's protectionism to do it. Right? So it required government's intervention in order for them to gain the position. What that is telling you is the fact that it's not because of the free market that created the monopolies. It's not because of the free market that created oligopolies or cartelization. It's because of government's interference that results in that very problem, and that is what corporatism is all about. It's about, rewarding incompetency and punishing success. So what corporatism does, through government intervention, and it's in government's interest as well, it basically props up those who punish the consumer, and it punishes those who benefit the consumer. And that was the real rationale behind the antitrust law legislation. So let me again just read through some more of the comments here. And of course, again, thank you guys. As you said, Neville, I worked as a scientist working in the MOD, increasingly following David Kelly clash with Tony Blair. Government agencies were forced to become corporate entitles to protect Blair. Yes, this is a very big problem. You've got, that's another thing with corporatism. You've got the politicians in bed with the giant corporations. Now, it's not so much that big business is a problem. Big business is healthy for an economy, but it's not healthy when you've got this style of economic system. And the reason being is because where's government always going to turn to? It's always going to turn to where the money is, right? And if you allow government to become a power and controller over the economy, which it has unfortunately, you basically create this system you see today. And that's why it's impossible to have a mixed economy without that of this corporatist system. It's impossible. You simply cannot have a mixed economy without corporatism. It's why it thrives. It's because you've got this style of economy where government has the power and control to then dictate and pick and choose winners and losers. And you have this system that basically, in both interests, they work together with each other, government and big corporations, as a protectionist racket against the little man, against you, basically. I mean, let's just say, and it doesn't matter whether you are someone who's, socialist minded or whoever you are. Most of you young folk who go through education will probably at one point have had a dream of maybe running your own, games company or something like that, or maybe having a dream of becoming some sort of artist or whatever it may be. And you might have had a dream to be able to start up your own business. However, you feel that the system's so against you that it becomes so difficult to do so, and you can't really afford to do so because of the way things are set up. Well, that's the harsh reality of what it's like under corporatism. It's anti-capitalist. That's the very reason why they seek to destroy capitalism, so that the little man really has very little choice other than to be dependent upon those who dominate. So you've got very little opportunity. It's the way the system is geared, and it's funny that because the very giant, and I'll use one example, and you should look the guy up. His name's Nick Cowner. I'm pretty sure I've pronounced his name correctly. He's a Canadian. He pretends to be a capitalist. He's not. He's a political entrepreneur, folk. Watch his TED Talk. Nick Cowner. I think he's a Canadian. And he stands up on stage and he talks about how capitalism is causing this great strife, and he goes on to tell lies about the wider gap between the rich and poor. Doesn't matter about that, however. The point being is the fact that this fraudster is standing on stage knowing fine well that the average person is going to buy into his bullshit. He knows that. He can see through it. He knows that. He knows that everybody will just sit and say, "Oh yeah, I see. Capitalism's the problem. Yeah. I can understand where you're coming from." He knows what game he's playing at. Why does he do that? He does it because he knows for a fact that if he can get people to believe that capitalism is the root cause of the problem, he can maintain his monopoly. He can maintain being guaranteed the government subsidies. He can maintain his dominance and wealth, because after all it's socialism that helps him to maintain that. If you oppose capitalism, you basically oppose essentially what would take that away from him, because what would capitalism do? Capitalism would do exactly what you saw of the 1860s with those oil refinery companies that would face losses and eventually face bankruptcy. In other words, what capitalism would do, it would take the incompetent business owners and it would wipe the floor with them. So the only people who would be successful in a free market under a capitalist system are those who are in the interests of benefiting you, the consumer. Right? That's not what corporatists want. Corporatists seek to destroy that because they don't want you to benefit from anything. They were anti-consumerist. So, of course, they seek to destroy the capitalist system. And like the likes of Nick Cowner, now, someone on my list, Nicole, had, of course, shared a good, year or so ago, the video of Nick Cowner. And, of course, I sat and watched the TED Talk. And the guy, I can understand why so many people fall for the rhetoric. But because I can understand everything, I can see right through his compulsive lies. He's acting like the good guy. Oh, I'm here to be sympathetic of your feelings, and I care about you, the people. I care so much about you. I care so much because I'm standing here with all the wealth that I hold today. I'm a successful businessman. And oh, how sympathetic I am of you. The fact that I'm rich and the fact that the poor are getting poorer. Not only did he lie about that, because the poor are not getting poorer, not only did he lie about that, he lied about the very fact that it's capitalism. He wants you to believe that. Because the fact is, the more that these fraudsters, they're called political entrepreneurs, right? That's what they are. They're corporatists. The more that they can get you to believe that capitalism is the root cause of the problem, is the more that they can enslave you in there. Right? They've got you where they want you. They want you to believe that capitalism is the root cause of the problem. Why? Because it's through the use of socialist government interventionism, through the use of socialism, take for example the government subsidies, that protects their losses, that socialises their losses, that through the use of socialism allows them to completely dominate the market, and for you, the little man, to be left in no position to even compete against them. Now, not long ago, before I was posting my videos again, I was on the Conservative Party. Well, let's just say I was on their Facebook page. And I appreciate the Conservatives in many regards. Although I'm not conservative, I do appreciate the free marketeers, like Steve Baker, etc., and Mark Francois. However, this was a topic on the European Union and Brexit. And on one of their posts about Brexit, I got into, let's just say, an argument or a debate. And this guy, all full of himself, the typical, I don't know if he's a politician or whatever, right? He came across as the type who stares down at me as if he thinks he is something, he's far above me, right? I've created this and I've created this sort of wealth and what have you done with your life and all the rest of this? So you're just a photographer, sticking his nose up at me, you're just a photographer, what would you know? The typical snot-nosed, I've created all this, right? Yeah, very good. Do you know what he was trying to argue? He was trying to argue that, in other words, he was trying to argue in favour of the European Union and why it was not good for Britain to leave. Now you can see right through these fraudsters, right? These are the type of people who pretend that they support capitalism. They're not. They're fraudsters. They're fraudsters, right? Don't ever buy into their nonsense. And sadly, for years and years and years, these same fraudsters have existed in the Conservative Party for decades. Right? They're filled with all these Ken Clarks, etc. They wouldn't even know capitalism if it slapped them across the face. They wouldn't even know what it is. Right? Capitalism's not this protectionist system. The reason why fraudsters like that like to pretend this is capitalism is to fool the common man. Pull the wool over their eyes. So why then would those specific individuals support wholeheartedly and passionately the European Union? Well, it's just like Nick Cowner. It's because it guarantees them their position. You see, these type of political entrepreneurs, these type of businessmen, the political entrepreneurs that is, they fear the capitalist system. They fear it. The reason why they fear it is because they know for a fact that if you ever move towards a free market, real successful business people would wipe their arse with them. They seriously would. And those type of business people would end up facing losses. Now, I came across one over a year or so ago, and you could tell he was a political entrepreneur. And he thought he was being smart with me and everything. And eventually I got around to saying to him, I said to him, you want to know the real reason why you oppose capitalism? You oppose it because you know fine well that the capitalist system would wipe the floor with you, and you would be the one facing the losses, and more successful, more competent business people would wipe the floor with you, and they would benefit the consumer. And know what his response was? A sad face. He had no response to it other than a sad face. Because deep down that dug away his confidence. It ripped his heart right out of him. It basically, spoke 1,000 words because it was the truth. That's why the sad face came up. He knows that. So that's why they have to pull the wool over your eyes to make you believe that socialism is the answer, so that they can keep the position that they're in. And that's the problem with the mixed economy. It keeps them in that position. But when you take that, power away from them, and you open up fierce competition, because this is what prevents monopolies from forming. When you open up fierce competition and consumer choice, it creates that very issue where they know the only way they can be successful is being efficient and providing a service that will benefit consumers. So that kind of explains the whole system today. So let me go through some more comments. As you said, Neville, corporatism is a form of socialism where people lose their identities and become a collective. You're exactly right, and that is unfortunately the truth with regards to the corporatist system. Is it CTG Slayer? As you say, what do you think about workplace safety regulations and environmental regulations? Should the government regulate these? I too am new subscriber. Your videos have been very helpful. Thank you. I do greatly appreciate your comment. Let me cover something in relation to do with that. Okay, because this is vitally important that you understand this. When it comes to private businesses, and of course you can turn your attention to the United States of America because it's the perfect example in history. You have to remember that not only are you up against competition, especially in a capitalist system, you also have your business reputation to take into account. Now, how you treat your workers is going to pass off onto your consumers, right? But not only that issue. If people concede to the fact that the goal of private business owners is to make a profit, how do you maximize your profits? You maximize your profits by minimizing your costs. Like John Davison Rockefeller, he maximized his profits by minimizing his costs. In other words, it costs you more to use more resources. So how did Rockefeller gain a greater profit margin? Well, what he would do, he would, find ways to produce, to be more productive, to maximize his profits, but to be more productive in a more efficient way. Rather than being like the other oil refinery companies that just dumped 60 or 40 odd % of their crude oil, Rockefeller understood, because he was an accountant by trade. So this is the point. You maximize your profits by minimizing your costs. If it costs you more to use more to use more resources, you're going to, reduce how much resources you're using, and you're going to be more efficient over resource usage. So that's key, because when it comes to the whole thing to do with private business, they're going to maximise their profits. However, if you've got a dangerous workplace, right? The reality is, if someone gets injured, you're going to have to pay compensation. And it might be a case where the person might end up out of work for weeks, maybe even months, and that's going to come at a very, very heavy cost on your business. So you're making losses. It does not benefit you from a profitable sense. Instead, it's rather quite the opposite. It's coming at you at a greater cost. Because of having a dangerous workplace, you're having to pay out compensation, right? So it's coming at a very great cost. The other reason why having a dangerous workplace comes at a greater cost is because when you damage the reputation of your private business or your industry, whatever it is, when you damage the reputation of your business, you're going to need to pay a wage premium in order to entice people to come and work for you. In other words, you're going to be forced into a position of paying super high wages in order to entice new employees to come and work for you. Take, for example, if you look at industries like those who work as electricians or other dangerous jobs. Have you ever noticed how all the dangerous jobs have the sort of wages that are crazy money? The reason for that being is because you're in no position to pay less than that. You wouldn't be able to entice people to come and work for you to work for less than that. So that's the problem if you've got a dangerous workplace. If you have a dangerous workplace, you've got no choice but to pay out the wage premium. And that's going to come at a heavier cost on the private business. Again, in relation to profits. How do you maximise the profits? You minimise the costs. And that those wages are going to come at a greater cost. Therefore, it is actually in the interests of the capitalist to improve the safety of his workplace, because then he's paying less in compensation because less people are getting injured, etc. And he's paying less in terms of what you call danger money, because the reputation is being upheld. So that's the key importance of that to do with the reputation of business. Now, the reason why the United States of America is so pivotal in this is the history. Because for more than a century-long period, all the way through the Industrial Revolution, right up to, 1970, it was more or less left down to capitalism. Okay, we understand as a whole, because you've got to look at the economy as a question of scale. Like I said, corporatism was coming around, and you would see that sadly in the 20th century. But this is why the economy is not black and white. Certain parts of the market even by today's standards, you would say, okay, this is capitalism, this isn't. For example, leaving prices be to fluctuate in the marketplace, that's capitalism, right? That is. Okay, we might not live in a capitalist system as a whole, but that's capitalism. It's no different to that of safety in the workplace before the 1970s. It was more or less left down to competition and business reputation. Now, for more than a century-long period, workplace death toll and the workplace injuries continuously dropped. There was a dramatic decrease in workplace death, the workplace deaths per year, right up to 1970. And there was a massive decline in workplace injuries. Both were just rapidly declining year in, year out. So it was because of capitalism with competition and reputation that enabled that to happen. After all, it's no different to that of, what you see in companies today. You see the return services, don't you? Take, for example, these companies, these retail companies that have return services, the 30-day money back guarantee thing and everything, where you can now, take your goods to that department and say, look, this is faulty or something, get your money back, and you understand the point. You've got guarantees and everything. That was all pressured, not because of government regulation, but because of competition in the marketplace. So what happened then? What happened in 1970 or the 1970s? I'm sure it was 1970. Well, the OHSA happened. That is a government regulatory body. The Occupation for Health and Safety Administration. Once they came around, and once that government regulatory body got involved, the OHSA, workplace injuries fell stagnant and has been stagnant ever since. Right to this very date. Think about that. You know for a fact that the workplace injuries and workplace death toll was rapidly declining for more than 100 years before then. Isn't it magical that as soon as government's regulatory body steps in, the OHSA, that as soon as that occurs, that it falls stagnant? That's quite telling. What that is telling you is the fact that government's regulation was a hindrance in that regard. Now, I'm not saying that all government regulation is a bad thing. I don't believe in that black and white argument. I think that having minimalist, low levels of government regulation is sensible. And I'm no expert, but I think a reasonable government regulation in terms of safety would be not the height one, not to do with what height you can work at on a ladder or something like that. You understand, not that. I think what would be a reasonable safety government regulation would be how long you can spend on doing a specific job, maybe. Unless someone can come up with a reasonable argument for me, but there are certain dangerous jobs where all it takes is a slight mishap of misconcentration, and certain things can happen. So some people could even come up with the argument, I suppose, and say, well, you're under pressure anyway, that you may have to self-regulate in that regard. As your own life is at risk. I can understand people's own arguments, but like I said, nothing's black and white, and I think there are certain things that you can think of that that might be reasonable, but in most cases, there's probably a lot of government regulation there in terms of the safety that's a hindrance to, the workplace, and is actually led to, the very problem with the stagnation in that regard. So I hope that covers that argument for you, CTJ Slayer. It's sadly one of those things. And again, I greatly appreciate, of course, for the subscribers and stuff like that. Neville, as you said, corporations are unable to innovate and are a form of protection. I suppose someone could argue that. Yeah, I mean, in my argument, I think a serious problem is more or less the system in place, but I can reason of where you may be coming from in many regards. But overall, I mean, like I said, government's interference is the main, in my argument, is the main problem that we've got. That for me is the main problem. As you said, excessive government regulation destroys capitalism. Exactly, it does. It does. It's the very reason why these oligopolies, these cartels, all of them are able to form. A prime example of a cartel would be the American Medical Association. It would never, a cartel like that would never last in a free market. But another example of the cartelization was the collusion between the private pharmaceutical companies. Again, why did that come around? Because of government and its monopolised third-party payer system. So you can see how government pretty much lays the blocks in place in order to keep, competition out, and basically enables these things to occur. I think it's like, you can see yourself, it's in government's own self-interest. I think there's an exception when you've got someone like Donald Trump. I don't know what he's done with regards to healthcare, but apparently he has deregulated a fair bit. Okay, we can only go by the word of that. I would like to see the true extent of how much he's deregulated by. I would, because we had the same rhetoric about that of, who was it? Ronald Reagan, and when he left, more regulation was introduced than what had been deregulated. That's been the sad reality of the past, century-long period. As you said, thoughts on agorism. I've never really looked into the whole thing on agorism, to be perfectly honest with you. There's a lot of things that I have to, learn about. And agorism, I'm sure if I looked it up, I'd probably recognise what it is. I mean, if you actually explained briefly, then I'd probably catch on. Do you think we should have competitive legal firms or create a fiscal constitution? I think is an interesting thing with regards to fiscal constitution. Something, I mean, if there's to be a constitution, and I'll say this, right? If there's to be a constitution, what needs to be ensured, Osmant, is there needs to be a law to prevent subsidies in the vast majority of cases. The only time that I can think of subsidies as being something reasonable, and it's the only time that I think that subsidies should ever exist, is during a period kind of like similar to today, where you face a pandemic and there's a lockdown and there's a serious problem. Other people could argue, well, just leave things to liquidate, but I think to a certain extent it should really only be a temporary measure. You know, if there's to be any sort of fiscal constitution, you would outlaw the touching of interest rates. Leave it be to the free market. Don't even touch interest rates and things like that. And basically, having free market money, it's the fiscal irresponsibility, the things like the manipulation of interest rates and the reserve ratios, etc., and this fraudulent fractional reserve banking system. That fractional reserve banking system that's caused the problems that we have today. And as you know, I'm not a big self-explanatory with my End of Fed book, but pretty much why the very reason I oppose the central banking system. So I for me personally, think it's really all down to leaving it to the free market. Leave interest rates be. If it's during a period of, when there needs to be more saving done, there shouldn't be the lowering of interest rates. So I think it's reasonable in that regard. I don't know what the emoji thing was. I might have missed it. Right, I know what you're talking about, the sad face. Yeah, I mean, it's quite sad that, it's quite sad that, because that example, mate, I mean, the person could only come back with a sad face because they knew. Because they probably know that if they were to run business in an environment where they rely on success, their business would not be successful. So, that's the sad face of this corporatist system. It's propping these incompetent business people up. It's basically guaranteeing them some form of, way of running business and whatnot. And the taxpayers continuously forced to pay for it all. To pay for all their losses and whatever. And that's why so many of them favoured the European Union, because it was protectionist at its root. They don't like competition, and that's economic fascism for you. You know that yourself, mate. I mean, that's quite the sad thing. As you said, Neville, very interesting. Many conservatives are not conservatives, and certainly not capitalists. It's sad that this is the truth. I support the free market conservatives, because I'll support anybody and everybody who's in defence of the free market. I don't care who you are. That's why you see on my channel, it's largely dedicated in the economics. You'll find a lot of libertarian channels where there's a lot of bickering between other libertarians. I'm not like that. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a conservative. I don't care if you're, classical liberal. I don't care if you're minarchist. I don't care if you're, anarchist. I 100% stand by, any of you and support your positions, because for me, the main argument that should be is getting government out of the economy. It's for that is more important than issues over things like abortion, etc. Sorry, it really is. It is. I was once told, and it's so true, and I thought about it, and it's true. And I was told this, that economics must always come first before policy. Why? Because it's the style of economy that you live under that dictates your freedom. If you were living under communism, economically, would you have the freedom to choose over those things? Of course not. So that's why when it comes to all different types of people who support the free market, I don't care who they are, what position they are, you have my full support. As you said, Adam, and that opinion on the far right and ways to stop them, depending on how they put themselves into context. If you've got the type of people who are strongly nationalistic, the only way that you can stop them is information that refutes their arguments. The same thing with socialists in general. You see, you have to point people in the direction of recorded history. And let's just use this argument for argument's sake. Their strong support of income taxation and their strong support of dependency upon the state, what has that created for them over the past century alone? Well, the reality is, it's never led to a government serving them, has it? It's always led to that of a government that's always got its own self-interest that ends up making the people dependent upon them. And through this, the democratic system, I'm not a big fan of it, but it's the illusion of people power. The illusion that the people have power, when in reality all they're doing is voting collectively for who goes in power and leads them. And what has governments done, over decades? And every 4 years they elect someone new to go in. Take, for example, a new Prime Minister, or a new President of the United States, or, whatever. I know the United States is not a democracy, but you understand the point. It's the United States is a bit different because at least they have the system that they do, but with the democratic system here in Britain, they vote for someone every 4 years and they get the same thing every 4 years. Well, near enough. And it's this problem, that's what destroys their narrative. Because it's that dependency upon the state that basically leads down the road of the very plutocratic style of governance you see, such as Westminster. Just look at the last 3 years when they tried to overturn Brexit. If that wasn't enough evidence as it is, it's proof. And what created that plutocratic? And even in today's pandemic, and I heard recently, and this is the truth, I heard recently that these politicians in Westminster are now giving themselves wage bonuses. Meanwhile, people back at home are probably sitting no longer with a job. So you see, that's the problem with people who, depending on how you define the far right, if far right in people's context means strong free market, then it's a different story with that person. If far right and far left and all the rest of this, if going by that political scale, like the clock face, anybody who's in favour of strongly nationalistic tendencies and strong protectionism and this, strong government, they're going down the road of a style of economy where the government's going to go on the path of its own. And in many regards, I argue that is still strongly socialist. You take, for example, today's Great Britain, with the protection over the NHS and stuff like that. Again, this corporatist system. You see, it's that dependency, all because of the income tax, the dependency of people upon the state, and the state being the provider. You're always going to get a political class then that thinks, we know what's best for the people than the people do themselves. And the funny thing was, during the period when there was heavy nationalisation, the so-called period of the prolonged testing of democratic socialism, it was quoted by J. Douglas of the Labour Party, a democratic socialist politician. He said, "The gentlemen of Whitehall really do know what is best for the British people than the British people do themselves." That should tell you the attitude of these people. It was the same thing, the same attitude with the likes of Anna Soubry, etc., in the lead up to Brexit, where they actually had the arrogance and the gall to turn around and say to folk, you didn't know what you were voting for, you were too stupid. They actually had the gall to come out and say that. They literally, and that really does sum up government to a T. That really does. And that for me is what destroys the narrative of anybody who supports any, regardless of what context you put into it with regards to left and right. That's my view on that particular issue. As you said, keep up the great videos, mate. They are very informative and interesting, very well explained as well. If possible, could you do a video on welfare and perhaps a presidential election in America? Thank you, mate. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm quite interested in what's going on at the moment. And something that I've actually been paying attention to, mate, is the walk-away crowd. And that correlates to this whole presidential, build-up and everything, and even the Black Lives Matter thing that happened recently in the collectivist movement. All these Marxists who had been trying to strip you of your liberty and stuff, and, just Antifa, etc. I've been paying close attention to all of that. And I've been sitting watching the walkaway videos. I was actually sitting thinking to myself and doing one, not of course me saying about walking away, but a video for me to put together the top 10 reasons for why people should walk away from the Dumbocrats, as I call them. I understand from my perspective that the whole Republican and Democrat thing had more or less become one. They really weren't that different from one another. Okay, Trump's a bit of an exception, but there needs to be a message to be made clear that the whole system itself is fucked. Sorry to use that language, but that is just the case. The whole system itself is morally bankrupt. So, at the end of the day, I'll be more than happy to do something with regards to the welfare. You take, for example, the welfare state and when it created with single parent households. And it's created a problem, and again that all relates to the dependency issue and how, in my view, it'd be much better for people to have charitable operations and have a free market and lower cost of living, etc., etc. It's far better for people. As you said, Red Hood, one thing that doesn't get talked about was the wages were rising for workers an amazing amount during the Industrial Revolution due to demand for skilled labour to operate the machines. In fact, in one concession, someone had asked me if I could do a response on Richard Wolff. Now, I've done a response to Richard Wolff in a video before on capitalism. Of course, it was an earlier thingy, and I split it into 4 parts. Some of you might remember it, but during the video of Richard Wolff, he concedes to the fact that wages, thanks to capitalism, had been continuously increasing since 1840 right up to 1970. So the fact that a socialist concedes to that is something significant. And in the United States of America, the real wage earning growth rate per year on average was growing by 1.6% per year, and that's quite important, because when people always come out about these strikes, and I said it before and I'll say it again, and I even read this even from the likes of the Mises Institute, so it's actually coming from economists, and they argued this themselves. The bottom line is, the very reason why all of these, strikes broke out in the Industrial Revolution and why they were demanding higher pay, it's because it's not because the wages were not improving. Of course they were. The wages were improving. It's because the frustration stemmed from wanting more. So in other words, what they're basically saying is, imagine if you were to go to a period before the Industrial Revolution where there was no wage growth, where it was just extremely dirt poor wages, and everybody lived in extreme poverty, which everybody did before the Industrial Revolution. If you were to go back to that time period, why was there no strikes then? It's because it didn't exist. The wage growth did not exist. So people merely became frustrated purely because of the growth. So they became impatient, in other words. That's the very reason for why you saw the strikers that you did. It's because of the frustration that they faced. There was wage growth across the whole of society, and people just became impatient. That was really all of what it boiled down to. Unfortunately, that was just a part and parcel of reality. That's not to say that there wasn't problems in the 19th century, as we know, because of the things, like I say, the protectionist tariffs and everything, but you understand from that perspective. Yeah, the Trump and Biden. Oh my God, man! I mean, it's absolutely insane. These Biden supporters. So I actually mentioned the other day there was this lassie, and she's literally screaming and shouting at the camera, and she's saying, "Listen, Republicans," and she's saying, "They warned us about people like you," and she's like literally going nuts. And then at the end of it, she's pure screaming, and she's like, she just looks like a pure psychopath. It's like, and she's going off her nut, and she turns pure bright red. She reminds me of that cartoon character out of 101 Dalmatians, or it was out of that film Matilda, and the evil bitch, the one that I think's the teacher or something like that. And she's quite the big one with the whip or something like that. Or the ruler, I can't remember. I think it was the film Matilda. You probably remember. And she's the big butch one, the big, boss one or whatever. That's who she reminded me of. And she's like, she's the one telling you that, you're to listen to her. And, oh, they warned us about you. She's, socialists are so arrogant. They really are arrogant. I had one earlier on the other day, and this socialist thought he was being a smart arse, and he says to us about how, the typical argument that if you privatise something, it means you only want things affordable for the rich. That's the argument he used with the education. He says, oh, so you only support education affordable for the wealthy. And I asked him, from your arrogance, where did that actually say that? And no response. Because that's it. That sums them up to a T. They're filled with that. It's all these baseless claims. Unfortunate as it is. Housing in America has gotten expensive due to zoning laws and land use regulations. I could believe that. I could seriously believe that. I don't know too much about the whole argument, but I can certainly reason with that. Especially if government restricts quantity of house building and where can be built, etc., etc., etc. The laws of supply and demand certainly play a big role in that. But I can certainly believe that with regards to the regulations, mate. I can reason with that. As you say, Basel 2, entry into the market becomes harder and harder the more regulation there is. Exactly, that's true. It's a barrier into the market. And as you said, which may lead to a monopoly or at least just a few established competitors. Precisely. That what Basel II has stated, that's exactly the whole thing with this corporatist system. And the more regulations, the more complicated it becomes. The regulation sets a barrier to entry into the market. It makes it more and more difficult for small business people to even enter the market, and it creates that very problem, and he's absolutely spot on. Hello, good to see you, mate. As you're going to say, I swear, are all commies such wankers? I swear, go to the comment section of Vosh. I've been requested several times to certainly do responses or debate him or whatnot, and although I haven't read the comments section, oh, my time on YouTube, I certainly know that, mate. I certainly know that. They're religious cultists. That's it with socialists. And it doesn't matter what you call them. A socialist is a socialist. And it doesn't matter whether they call themselves a democratic socialist, a libertarian socialist. Every one of them try to redefine socialism to suit their own agenda. And they even try to twist history. Every time. Vicky 1999 I can somewhat sympathise with, only because that specific individual, and seldom do you come across them, where they may talk nonsense, but at least that specific individual can be nice, right? However, with the majority of them, they're very, very arrogant, very ignorant. And another fine example of one who probably, and again, seldom do you ever come across it, probably the nicest one I ever came across was ContraPoints. And I can somewhat, that's not the key word. I was thinking sympathise, not sympathise. I can somewhat, I don't know what the word would be. Basically, when it comes to someone like ContraPoints, I'm fine with people like that, because that specific individual, ContraPoints stated that doesn't understand really the whole thing and is happy to be proven wrong or whatever. Fair enough, right? People like that, I've got no problem with, right? It's the very type of people who have never touched an economics textbook in their life, yet they think they can arrogantly tell you what is what. And again, Mouthy infidel is not the worst. Mouthy infidel isn't the worst. You know, to a certain extent, at least he tries to debate on specific given things. But his arguments do not add up. I don't know whether he just parrots things that his father's told him or something. Sometimes that happens, unfortunately. But trust me, I mean, over specific years, I mean, I remember I was arguing with the likes of Red Scare TV. Now, those are your religious zealots, and I know exactly what they're like. Hell, even that Jason Unruh was exactly like that. And one of the worst I just came across recently that I was recommended to check out was that Bad Empananda, or whatever you call him, or something. Bad Empananda, I don't know, he's some Spanish guy or something. And he's literally, it's fucking sad, man. So sad. He's actually styled himself to look like Che Guevara or Fidel Castro. And you know, it's that kind of sad where to a stage that it becomes a fashion statement. It's like, geez, oh man. There's something seriously mentally wrong with them. Seriously mentally wrong. But yeah, you'll find that a lot. Unfortunate as it is to say. It's the truth. As you say it, I know, try to convince a Marxist that the Marxist dialect of history is wrong. It is about, and is easy to trying to convince a Christian God isn't real. Yeah, I mean, to me, Christians and religious people I can sympathise with, and I'm not religious. Do I believe in God? Perhaps. Do I believe in religion? No, I don't. I don't personally believe in religion. Do I respect people who are Christian and who do believe in that stuff? Of course. I mean, I do respect them. And it's not because of their conservative roots or whatever else. But for me, there's a difference. At least they have a belief, right? Whereas socialists actually have recorded history there, staring them pinpoint blank in the face, actual evidence, right? Christians don't. Christians do not have, the hardcore, factual evidence to say, yes, I have seen God. They don't have that. Nothing wrong with that. Perhaps they might have stories about the Bible, etc. Okay, fair enough. I can respect that. But when it comes to socialists, socialists have got so much historical evidence stacked against them that it really does take extreme, willful ignorance to stare past it. Take, for example, the evidence of what you saw in the early 1970s in Chile, where immediately following the price and wage controls followed the food shortage problem. And then, of course, thanks to all their heavy nationalisation and running the printing press, they followed into hyperinflation. And what did the socialists do? Tried to project the blame off elsewhere and say that wasn't the fault of socialism. Honest to God, folk, I mean, they really are that pathetic. And you know it yourself. You know it. What that's saying to you is, they do not care about facts, reason and logic. Right? All that lies they tell you about how they care about the sick, the needy, the poor, the disabled, and they try to use it against you. And I remember, and it was quite an interesting video. It was an old one. It was by Ben Shapiro, and he made the argument against the left, and he was saying that, you know, leftists use these people merely as a means to make their opposition look bad. So in other words, if they say that they support and protect the playing identity politics, in other words, but if they say that they are the protectors of the poor, the disabled, the needy, you know, etc., etc., then that must mean that anybody who opposes the left opposes the very sick, poor, disabled and needy, etc., etc. You understand where I'm coming from? That's the game that they play at. And it's true. It's true. I mean, they actually try to, you know, make their opposition out that way. But that's what contradicts them. How can they claim to support all of those people, but then stare in the historical evidence and stare straight past it? Because the truth is, their real agenda is not within trying to better society. And I just recently watched a video by Thomas J. DiLorenzo, who touches upon Ludwig von Mises's book on socialism and destructionism. And with regards to destructionism, this was an argument made by Ludwig von Mises in his last couple of chapters, apparently, on socialism. I've yet to read the book, and I would more than love to. But what Ludwig von Mises argues on destructionism is, and you're seeing it recently, like the looting and rioting, etc. Basically, socialists' main goal is destructionism of the economy, to destroy the economy, because it's the only way that they can then usher in communism. So there you have it. So what that's saying to you is, the real agenda of socialists it's not about the sick, the poor, the needy, the disabled. It's actually about destroying the economy in order to usher in their ideology. So they're basically saying that their ideological viewpoint of socialism is more important to them than people suffering. Yeah, that should that should emphasise. You would have to be seriously mentally twisted to have that type of mentality, and that's why you can never reason with them. That they're so unreasonable. So yes, I mean that was that comment. It even happens in the same area of the brain. Yep, I completely agree. So there's been a lot of interesting, you know, comments and whatnot, guys. I do greatly appreciate it and everything. But yes, I think I've covered the basis. I mean, really, to summarise, when it comes to capitalism, it's the separation of the economy from government. You know, and that of corporatism is very protectionist. As you said, will this be up on the channel after it? Yes, indeed it will. You know, I'll delete the last few, and they were kind of like tests or whatever. I tried to get it running on Facebook, but it just wouldn't. But basically, for me to quickly summarise here for you guys, corporatism is a special interest favour system, and you know, Nicole was basically asking me the question with regards to the corporatism, and she had asked in relation to that about the whole thing, and she was questioning, you know, well, what would make it right for there to have giant corporations or giant trusts, but these small business people who are left at a disadvantage. Well, there lies the issue. Capitalism does not guarantee you success. Right? You're not supposed to be guaranteed success in any economy. So the bottom line is, for anyone who is incompetent in business and they end up a failure, well, the whole point of that is to teach failure a lesson, so that the next time that they start up a private business, they can learn from that and, grow, improve. One of the things that can happen in a capitalist system is for more efficient competitors to buy over that business to improve it. Even for a more skilled, competent business owner to train up that former business owner to improve his skills. So that's the point. Capitalism's not about guaranteeing success, and you can never do that. And that's the issue. So when Nicole asked the question, what would make it right? Well, at the end of the day, Rockefeller and his likes became successful efficiently and through their own doing, through being successful, and they were the ones benefiting the consumers, so they're not a problem. They're not holding monopolies. There was always competition there. Take, for example, the 1870s, when the producer and seller of the electric light bulb would come along. After all, what was Rockefeller's business? Rockefeller's business was, turning the black glop into something useful, which was basically for kerosene, for producing kerosene for people to light their own homes. Well, at the end of the day, what else did Rockefeller benefit from that? Well, Rockefeller basically benefited the environmentalists. Now, I don't know if there was environmentalists of that time period, but he benefited the environment because it used to be a case where you had to depend upon whales for whale oil. But because of the profitable, business of drilling oil from under the ground, etc., and thanks to Rockefeller, then it became profitable for them to drill out of the ground rather than, killing whales, etc. So it saved whales, but not only that, of course, it benefited the consumer. Now, during the 1870s, there was competition. And because his business, was dependent upon kerosene, well, what do you think happens when the producer and seller of the electric light bulb comes along? Well, Rockefeller's not going to be able to compete against that now, is he? That's the story of competition and, of course, the way a free market would operate. And the consumer's the one who benefits. Now, this was never the case with that of the antitrust law legislation that was lobbied for between 1885 to 1890. The Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. The true rationale behind that was based on protectionism. In other words, it was never in the interests of the consumer. And I can even read that, and, again, I've read this several times, and I don't know if I've read it on here, but I'll read it, and it's in How Capitalism Saved America. It's mentioned by Thomas J. DiLorenzo, and I'm pretty sure it's in the Antitrust Myths, and he covers the rationale. So this is the quote that I'm going to basically read to you, and it's something that really shows you that they were never interested in the people. Never. Their interest was basically just for all wealth and power for themselves, basically. Funny that is, given the fact that that's the accusation that's used against capitalism. You've got to find that one magical. So, as it mentions, so much for a key justification for antitrust legislation. In fact, evidence indicates that members of Congress knew that the trusts were benefiting consumers by making products cheaper. A Congressman Mason stated during the US House of Representatives debates on the Sherman Act that, unquote, trusts have made products cheaper, have reduced prices, off quote. In the same statement, however, the congressman exposed the real rationale for the Sherman Act. Unquote. But if the price of oil, for instance, were reduced to 1 cent a barrel, it would not right the wrong done to the people of this country by the trusts, which have destroyed legitimate competition and have driven honest men from legitimate business enterprises. Off quote. In other words, it didn't matter that the trusts were marvels of efficiency, that were expanding production, employing thousands, and dropping consumer prices. The problem was that they were driving less efficient, higher priced competitors from the market. These competitors chose not to compete but to lobby Congress to pass a law that would hobble their more efficient rivals. And it says, thus the Sherman Antitrust Act was protectionist at its root. It was always designed to protect incompetent businesses from superior competition, not to protect consumers from monopoly. In short, political chicanery, mercantilism again, triumphed over free enterprise. What that is saying is, the real rationale behind the Sherman Antitrust Act was not in favour of the consumer. It was protectionist at its root. It basically laid the foundations for what led to monopoly creation. It essentially, protected the very incompetents who were initially charging the consumers more in prices. So there you have the corporatist system. And people need to understand, it's important to understand that even by today's standards, big business is not the problem. The problem isn't so much that you've got big businesses. The problem is that the way the system is set up, then it's only natural that big businesses are going to, lobby Congress and lobby government, even in this country, for special interest favours. Take Microsoft, for example. Yaron Brook explained an example of that, where Microsoft had many competitors up against them, and they were threatening to use government against, government, legislation, government regulation against Microsoft to wipe them out of the market. So what was Microsoft going to do? They were going to lobby government for special interest favours that would act in their behalf. So really, when you are faced with competition in the marketplace and you've got government's interference, that's the natural state of what happens. And anybody who turns around and says to you, oh, but this is the natural state of where capitalism leads, see if anybody says that to you. Just turn around and say to them, well, okay then, so if not for a free market economy, what do you suggest we should do? Because I'll tell you this, you can't have a mixed economy, because that's the extremes of corporatism. And you can't have socialism, because that just leads to totalitarianism. There's no such thing as socialism without it. The real face of socialism is the Soviet Union. So what are they suggesting to us? Are they suggesting that we should just stick with the mixed economy? With extreme corporatism? Are they suggesting we go down the road of socialism, which there's no such thing as democratic or libertarian socialism? It only results in the end, which is basically communism, or some might argue fascism. which is basically socialism in practice. So there really is no alternative to the free market. And we know for a fact that it's not the free market, it's not because of the freedom of the market that is the cause of monopoly creation and etc. etc. It's caused by government's interference. So therefore, we know what the solution to the problem is. The solution is to get government out of the economy. So they can't turn around and say to you, oh, but this is the natural state of what happens, because then they're basically just trying to argue either for socialism or the mixed economy. So they're self-defeating in their argument. You know what I'm saying? They're very self-defeating in that argument. As you said, yeah, I covered that. As you said, oh yeah, I was going to ask if you have a great red pilling video for clueless normies of any recommendations. Quite a lot of my videos I try to cover as much as possible in terms of anything that I pick up on and cover, especially things on to do with the robber barons, etc. These are things that will trigger a lot of those type of people. You've got to remember that, mate, because remember this. These are the type of people who like to convince people that capitalism's the cause of all their problems. Look at a recent video, for example. I responded to the Grovel Institute, if that's how you pronounce their name, and look at how many dislikes the video has got, right? And then look at the comments and you will see I've not had a single rational, critical argument yet. Not one. All they do is they just dislike the video because, oh, it's the truth. They can't handle it. And that's typically what you come up against. But one of the videos that I had that was one in that regard, and unfortunately 4,400 views, I can actually still click into the video, and although it says it's deleted, there's a section where I can actually show part of the video, believe it or not. I should actually live stream it. But it was the video of the undeniable truth of Nazi Germany, and what it showed was the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were really no different from one another. I should do another video on that. I should. But the reason why the video was deleted by YouTube, because apparently it was offensive. See, if that's the case, then every single one of my videos could be deleted. If that's the case, then, anything that they disagree with is deemed offensive, so then, therefore, my entire channel could be deleted. You see how pathetic that argument is by them? I don't know if you caught on the news recently, and I don't even know how true it is or not. And I hope, like I said, I'm not a big fan of the antitrust legislation, but there's an exception in this regard, only because of what we're currently living under today. There is a bit of an exception. Don't get me wrong, I do agree with the leader, the owner of Parler, who said he believes in competition coming along and people just naturally moving across, and I'm a member on Parler, of course, and I agree to a certain extent. But there is a seriously big problem here with big tech. And you know that Google runs YouTube, and apparently just recently, again, I don't know how true it is or not, but apparently they have passed. I don't know if they've passed or not. I'm not entirely sure. You could probably look up the information for yourself, but apparently they've passed legislation, antitrust legislation, against Google, which is quite significant, because you know that Google runs YouTube and etc. etc. So, what's going to come of that? What does it actually mean? I don't know. See, my solution, and I don't know how somebody hasn't really properly come up with it yet, but why is there such a problem? Why can't someone create another YouTube? You know, there doesn't need to be, you know, great big changes, but just create another YouTube that's just decentralized. I don't know. I've got things like a library. I've got, you know, and the disappointment is the biggest competitor to YouTube at the current time is BitChute, and I'm sad to say, folk, BitChute is unreliable. I've uploaded certain videos at times, and sometimes the first time I upload, the video doesn't even appear. I have to end up deleting it and then re-uploading again, and it's such a hassle, and it's a shame. It's a shame because it has potential. I just don't like the interface though. I think the interface could improve. These small things, and that's the frustrating thing. You know, if there's a competitor there that could actually step up and produce something that could compete, you know, that people would happily go across to. As you said, Liam, Rockefeller was good businessman, but the Rockefeller Foundation is shady. I agree. You know, I agree. You're absolutely right. It's everything to do with the feds, etc., and the entire foundation is morally bankrupt and everything, and you know, I completely agree with you in that. You know, it's a very, very sad thing. I think at the end of the day, I mean, this is why we need to get rid of this corporatist system. You know, the people think it's a case that capitalism is the cause of the problem. It seriously isn't. So our real problem is people buying into that, unfortunately. As you said, CTJ Slayer, would you be willing to make a video response to Vicky 1999's The True Death Toll of Capitalism and The True Death Toll of Communism, or have you already and I haven't seen them? No, I haven't done that yet. I think the only reason why, because I haven't been requested to as of yet, but I could get around to that. But, you know, it's a very difficult thing to argue because they completely reject reality. They really do. And she rejected even before, trying to say that, oh, it was the weather conditions that caused the Holodomor, etc. It's like, Jesus. But there was a video that I did on the death toll of capitalism or something like that, and it was in response to Badmouse Productions, if you remember him. And I did a video on that, and it's somewhere on my channel. So yeah, there is one there. If you scroll through, and you'll find it. It's somewhere. It was definitely in response on Badmouse Productions' argument. But in terms of Vicky 1999, I haven't quite got around to that yet, and perhaps I could, you know. I was requested to do a video response on her other video, something to do with again, it's in relation to do with capitalism, so I'm going to try and get around to that specifically. So yes, I mean, overall, folk, I think I've covered the basis of it. I mean, corporatism is not about less government regulation, it's about more government regulation. It's how they get the position that they do. It's a protectionist racket system. It's a system that uses socialism. It's not against socialism, it uses socialism. And I suppose one last point that I could address on is the fact that, believe it or not, the socialists actually favoured and supported corporatism, or another name for it was mercantilism, but they supported it because they knew it would destroy the capitalist system, and they supported that in the 19th century. The evidence of that is their support of things like the protectionist tariffs and the internal improvements, etc., etc. And you could see that even by today's standards. For example, there was even an article where it stated that Uber was too efficient for their competitors. So what did they want to do to Uber? They wanted to basically regulate the backside out of them. Why? Because they wanted to protect the competitors from Uber. So in other words, they wanted to protect the max taxi cabs, etc., from Uber. What does that tell you? They are subconscious corporatists. They don't even realise it, but they are. Unless they do realise it and they just don't own up to it. But yeah, I mean, that's the true face of socialists, in other words. They actually favoured and supported corporatism because they knew it would destroy the capitalist system. So it's all nonsense that has been claimed that capitalism's the cause of the problems, etc. It really isn't. It was the same thing with healthcare. The United States of America, its healthcare costs got out of control, and it's all in relation to do with all the socialist government interventionism, as I said before. So I hope I've covered pretty much everything. Anyway, folk, I've been on long enough, so 2 hours or something. But I will, of course, get around to doing my next video response. What it's going to be on, I've got stuff listed down on that. I'm going to have to go through, take a look through stuff, and start getting around to doing work on that and see whatever I can do. And we'll see. Some good news, at least for you guys, is that yes, thanks to yous, my channel has actually been doing pretty relatively well. I don't know if I can actually show you guys in any way. Let me just see if I can. I would have to actually go to my YouTube. Give us just a wee second here, and I'll just quickly show you guys. If I just go to back into right, I'll just quickly obviously show you guys, and oh, it's not working. I'll have to fix that. So it's showing my wallpaper, but it's not showing the... Hang on. Maybe it's because I haven't got this up. Hang on. Is this showing now? 2 seconds. Maybe it is. Yes, good, it's working. If I just go to... There. So, you guys have actually got me over 8,000 views. That I would say that's the highest I've had since after deleting all my old videos in mid-2015. I could even show you that some proof of that. If I just quickly just show you some proof of that, I'd need to go to monthly. I'll set that to lifetime, and I'll set that to total. And here you have it. Here 9,300, and that was in April 2016. After I deleted all my old videos, I tried to, really get views going again and everything, and that's the highest point since the last time. And you can see if I just go over 8,900, I'm not far from that. 12,300. So you can see things things are starting to progress, but the very fact that this is a wee bit behind, ignore that. That'll actually continue to grow. It'll match basically what this is, right? So it says 6,700, but this is the real thing to go by here. Is basically the 8,400 views a month that I'm getting right now. So yes, that's the highest point, and hopefully within, I don't know, the next week or two, I'll be over 9,000 views, and that'll be even above the April 2016 ranking or whatever in terms of the views I had of that month, which is significant because that will take me pretty far, and it shows that progress has been made, and I'm really starting to really grow the channel again. So again, to you guys, a big thanks, because it's down to you guys that's actually helped me in so many regards. Like I said, I mean, how YouTube operates these days, watch time means a lot, so the longer you guys watch the videos and stuff like that, it helps. Stuff to do with the liking the videos, commenting and everything, and just everything, and sharing the videos and everything, all of that helps a hell of a lot. And as I say, I mean, it really does help to really drive the views of this channel, and it's going step by step, and things are looking up, and I mean, it won't be long till I'm over 9,000, and you saw from the April 2016, that's not that far off now to that. So things are going well. And anyway, I just thought I would update you on that to do with the corporatism thing, and like I said, there's a big difference between that and, of course, capitalism. I suppose the last thing I should address, if anybody ever uses the terms state capitalism, crony capitalism, monopoly capitalism, all it is just corporatism. That's all it is. State capitalism is basically capitalism that's been strangled half to death through the use of socialism. It's basically socialism in practice, but socialists would never like to admit that. That's that should explain that for you. So yeah. So anyway, guys, thank you for watching my live stream, and I greatly appreciate all the comments that you guys have made and everything. Just quickly checking anything that I may have missed out. Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. Like I said, I mean, a lot of people have said that about myself. I'm always, pleased with everything. I just try to put out the information that I can, and I enjoy doing these responses and putting these, socialists in their place for spouting absolute nonsense. And I saw a gap in the market, to be honest with you, on YouTube in that regard. Because a lot of people just avoid it. They tend to go on. I see a lot of people going on about things like to do with abortions and gay rights and everything, and for me, I just thought a more important issue is on the economic arguments, and that's what I just exploited. So I enjoy doing it, guys. Like I said, big thanks to you guys for everything. They've washed the portals. That's again, thanks to yourself as well, for tuning in and everything. And I've never heard of that name before. I'd need to check that out myself at some point. Right, guys, I'm bloody getting dark already in here, man. It's the problem. I'm using window light. I do apologise, guys. As you said, evil more. Discovered your channel as the top 10 libertarian YouTubes. What, my channel's within the top 10 libertarian, or do you mean like obviously just from your own personal opinion or something? I mean, but like I say, guys, I mean, I appreciate all you guys, man. I mean, see, if it wasn't for yous, I'm you know, what incentive is there behind the channel? You know what I mean? That's why the views, you know, mean a lot to myself, you know, because, you know, that's kind of the purpose behind YouTube. I think the best part about it is the interactive, you know, side of things. And I can say that obviously from videos that I've put out, there's been comments that people have made and have, you know, informed me about certain things that I didn't know, and that's the great thing about it. I can even learn from you guys on certain things that, you know, I might not even know about, and that's the best part, you know, I find about YouTube and stuff, you know. Definitely. I think I know what one you're talking about. Interestingly enough, and there was something I think that was shared on something shared on Facebook in my libertarian views, because all I do when my Facebook page, the libertarian views, Scotty M, I'm gonna give you 2 seconds. I just needed to, you know, shine some light at least. But as I say, my libertarian views Scotty M page, I post my videos up there, so there's obviously a secondary copy to them, and the videos do automatically get posted on library, LBRY, and the good thing is obviously when the videos get posted there, then, you know, whenever folk watch them, they can get downloaded, so they're always protected in case, you know, the worst comes to the worst and they try to delete my entire channel, you know what I mean? But I was thinking, of course, is using my libertarian views Scotty M page and posting a lot more, not just the videos, but actually making posts and whatever. Someone requested me, like I said, to do an actual blog or whatever, and the kind of blog spot thing, it's very cheap crap, nasty. I don't know if you guys get any. I know WordPress, but I think they've kind of made it like a paid thing. You know, I don't know if there's a way you can thing me up a free sort of blog thingy on WordPress. But if there's any good recommendations of any blog places, then I would obviously create blogs and I would attach my videos there as well, you know, because that can be quite a helpful thing. It'll give you somewhere that you can actually share articles, like I say, so well, you call them blogs or whatever, where I can easily provide a lot of the information in that, and that can be very useful. So I'm definitely, you know, looking into that. But like I said, I mean, that blog spot, it's kind of cheap crap, nasty. I'm not that a big fan of it. That's the only thing. Yeah, that's quite an interesting question in terms of the Austrian. You know, the more I'm learning about Austrian stuff and whatever, I kind of feel a sway towards it in many regards. Especially stuff to do with their views on human action. I tend to, you know, sway towards it. I know there's obviously a hell of a lot more I need to learn, but I just feel that the Chicago school, I don't know, I could be wrong, but the Chicago school is more towards classical liberalism. Not that I've got anything wrong or against it or that. But I take influence from both of them in many regards. I take influence from both of them. A lot of my influence personally comes from the Austrian school though. From the likes of Tom Woods, Tom DiLorenzo, Robert Murphy, and many of the others. Especially one of them, Ralph Reichel, who sadly passed away in 2016. That guy was just an unbelievable scholar. His knowledge and things was just unreal. It's quite a sad loss. But, economists like that, those are and I suppose the very reason I took, influence for them is because I tend to be drawn more towards the economic history, not just of course the economic arguments, but mostly the economic history. That's what I take great interest in, and that's what I enjoy obviously about books like that on to do with capitalism and stuff, because it helps me get to understand periods of history to do with things like the Great Depression and whatever, and I just that's what I enjoy. So that kind of explains that. Yep. In terms of your question, mate, I mean, what was your meaning there in response to what? Either way, folk. I just thought, because these live streams, I just kind of do them in the fly and whatever, and they end up more than 2 hours and whatever, and you kind of, I'm not really organised with that type of stuff. You can see I'm a lot more organised when it comes to my when it comes to my actual videos when I'm doing editing and whatever. That's what I tend to put a lot in my work into. As you said, Danielle, yeah, I mean, hang on. Me too, I love economic history. I just absolutely love it, It's a big part of the thingy. I used to watch your videos years ago when you did the hikes and stuff as such. I've recently rediscovered you and I really enjoy your current content. I find it very educational. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Daniel, I mean, I love all that type of content and stuff. I love doing this stuff and showing people. A lot of my recent subscribers from the likes of 2015, they wouldn't know about that because, it was about May 2015, I ended up in a stupid depressive mood, and there was just something that I felt deep down. I wanted to separate my political videos from the other videos. Part of me felt that people were that my views were largely coming from other videos rather than the political stuff, and I just felt, right, if there's going to be views coming to this channel, I wanted it to be going to ensure that it's people actually interested in watching those videos. But back then, yeah, you're talking 2011 and stuff like that. I had all the Scottish accent videos, the videos to do with the ancient history of the Picts, and I had certain other videos to do with, certain videos to do with the stereotypes, and it was something else to do with specific other things to do with British and stuff like that, to do with how British really defines people who are not just English but of course Scottish, Welsh, and of course Northern Irish and whatever. all those types of videos that I had. And a lot of my recent subscribers, I would say from 1700 subscribers onwards, they wouldn't really know about it. They wouldn't be aware of it, because they would have subscribed to me at a point when all those videos were gone. And for a very lengthy period of time, because I went through a period of situational depression, that's just sadly as it was. It was start stop after then, because I reached 7,000 views per month, and then somewhere along the lines I felt, nah, they're at it, and it destroyed my incentive, and then the channel just dropped again, dropped into 2,300. I tried it again, went up to 7,000 odd views, and again I felt, fuck, something's wrong. But this time, when I get back into posting, I got my views right up above 7,000 views. This time, when something fell stagnant, I says, no, I'm not giving up. I'm gonna see what comes out of this. So what ended up happening was the views got to about 7,500. It was round about July 23rd. And my views peaked at about 7,500 a month per 28 days, that is. And then the views dropped right down to 5,900, and I'm thinking to myself, they must be really at it, right? I'm thinking to myself, what the hell's going on here? But I says to myself, no, I'm no giving up. So I kept on posting, and then out of nowhere, you guys might not know about it, but Sargon of Akkad ended up sharing one of my videos. Who was it? It was the video on Ash Sarkar. He shared it on Parler, and it ended up getting, a hell of a lot of views. That's why the subscriber rate is shot up over 100, per month. But thanks to, of course, himself, he helped me gain exposure. The video, in response to the Gravel Institute, helped other videos and stuff, and that managed to give me some leverage. And since then, I've shot right above 8,000 views a month, which shows that yes, I am making progress. It's been it's hard work, but it's at least then I've got an incentive, and I'm just going to keep on, towards that whole thing. But I do have my Scott CJ McKelvey channel, which you can look up. I don't know if I can type it in the wee comments section here. It's under my name. You can search it up on YouTube, and the channel, the channel should, if I just quickly show it there, the channel should be under photography. So I use it as kind of like a photography vlogging channel, so you can see some of my videos there if you like that type of content. I just haven't uploaded it to it for a while. The only reason being is because I've not exactly been out and about of recent. Unfortunate as it is to say. And it's not easy to come out and try to create content on stuff to do with photography and that when you're indoors and stuff. Maybe when I'm a bit more active, and who knows, because I've yet to get my driving license. Because once I get all that and I'm able to get out, then I'll certainly I'll do a combination between my economic videos and those type of videos showing my photography stuff, especially showing the landscape stuff that I photograph. But a recent video that I uploaded there was a video that was on my photo book, which was a documentary photo book I created of Verona and beyond. I created that myself, of course, because I went on holiday there and I took a lot of the photographs and whatever. But I mean, that's certainly something. So as you says, I'm sorry about your depression, but I'm glad that I found your channel again and that you're doing better. Thank you, I greatly appreciate it. You know, I certainly am. Don't get me wrong, I mean, I had certain problems and stuff like that of recent, but what can I do about it? At least this time I just feel this just makes me happier. You know, this I actually feel now I've got something that's driving me forward. Like I said, I mean, this channel thing, and see these videos. Nobody's going to watch like more than 2 or 3 hours of these videos. I don't know anybody that would, but in general, with these live streams, I don't really think me that much in terms of anything. But I mean, I kind of use these as kind of a way just to catch up with folk. But in terms of the actual videos that I create, then yeah, I mean, I put work into those. So I try to obviously keep keep up with that as much as I can. And a good economics book. Well, for a start, I mean, you want to start off with Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. That's the best book that anybody could turn to. The very first one. Like, the reason being is because not only are the chapters so short, the explanations are so simple to understand. I mean, it gets you to understand really just a lot of things, especially on the chapter on machinery and stuff like that. And you hear all the common day arguments of automation today, but that's a very good book to start off with and getting to understand basics. And although it's not Austrian school, again, there's a lot of useful information. It can also be used as a resource book as well. But Thingy's book, Thomas Sowell's book on basic economics, it's something you can read in sections and whatever, and it's well worth it. I mean, it gets you to understand a lot to do with things like prices and stuff, and his explanations are just fantastic. In fact, I took influence from a number of these examples and I turned it into video format. For example, his argument on prices. So what I did was I used some of these examples and actually turned it into video format. You can see that in the video I created on the economic calculation problem, where you see the example of the housing. See, a lot of the time when people read things or they might hear it's not enough. So when you actually show, actual pictures, it can, it's hard to explain. Some people are more visual learners, in other words, that's what I'm trying to say. So that's what I try to do. I try to do that at times. Obviously it takes a bit of work, but I do try to watch, because you know what YouTube is like with copyrights and everything. You kind of understand where I'm coming from, and see if I could get away with that. I go out and record my own footage, but yeah, it's one of these things. As you said, there seems to be a lot of great economic history scholars in the Anglo-Saxon world, but in Scandinavia I can't seem to find much. But as my friends only care about local arguments. I'm sorry to hear that, mate. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it's because the Industrial Revolution kicked off here in Britain and kind of followed with the United States or whatever. Definitely the United States, because their country was founded on individual principles. So that might be a reason for that. But then again, look at Austria. look at the likes of Hayek and Mises. They're arguably two of the greatest thinkers that have came around, and they weren't even. I don't even think Mises could really speak English that well. I actually just recently watched his, I think it was the documentary on it. Oh, it's fantastic. I enjoyed watching the entire thing and learning more about Mises personally. How the guy, at one point was living in France and then was forced to leave it behind, and how he moved to, the United States, and then he became friends, which I didn't realise, he became friends with the likes of Henry Hazlitt. I didn't realise Henry Hazlitt was someone who was, within the media and stuff like that. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff in how Mises got involved with FEE. Now, FEE, which is the Foundation for Economic Education, they were one of the first followers of me on my Twitter. Of course, I don't really use Twitter, but FEE was following me at one point. Who knows whether they still do, but so yeah, that I enjoy all that. It is a shame, but it sadly doesn't surprise me. People are kept in the dark. But over recent years, places like Scandinavian countries have been rolling back in their socialist policies, and I would like to see, these countries become more and more economically free. I'd like to see that. As you said, I will definitely check it out as well. Thank you. Lunch break is over. Though hope everyone has a great day. No problem at all, Daniel. So okay, I've not got the Rona. How many books do I have? I wouldn't really say I've got that much. I used to have more. It's 2 seconds. Because I used to have my Kindle, but I lost it, and then I got a new one. And I had books on my Kindle before. So I used to have the Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism on that. It's an excellent book that gets you to understand, the fault and the flaw of socialism itself. Again, there's probably PDFs there, and I'll get around to reading. There's ones by Tom Woods on the Politically Incorrect Guide to American History. There's also his book on 33 Questions, and these are books that I recommend. I'm obviously a big fan of Tom Woods, especially on his book Real Dissent, basically to do with the libertarianism. So these are the type of books that I kind of go. I like stuff to do with resource as well. So the good thing about that book is the very fact that you can pick out specific arguments, and it's made by the Foundation for Economic Education, and it's got specific arguments you can just jump straight to. a very good book in that regard. So I can't really say I've got that many. I can't really say I've got that many political books and stuff like that. But in terms of Kindle format, I've got a few. I think there's, the one that I was reading, or I had read more recently, was, of course, Christian Yimyet's book, which was in relation to do with socialism. So that was that specifically. So yeah. And one of course I'm interested in reading into is more to do with monetary history, because that's something I would love to learn a lot more about. Because if I can, I understand the basis, I understand the basis, but if I can learn a lot more in monetary history, that's a video that I would more than love to put hard work into and put that out to people, because I think that's something that's so important for people to get to understand, so that's something for sure. As you said, it's called Austrian economics after all. Mises and Hayek are my heroes, but became famous thanks to the English-speaking world, if I'm not mistaken. I suppose you could look at it that way. Yeah. I mean, it's especially Hayek. I mean, he came here to Britain, and Hayek was one of Mises' students. But yeah, I think it was through the English-speaking world or whatever. But something that I've because I follow them on Facebook and that, is the Students for Liberty. I'm very happy to see that countries like, across Europe, especially in countries like Italy, that there are those who are students for liberty and support the free market. If it wasn't for the likes of the internet, the information age, I don't think that would have ever existed. So that's a very positive thing. You have some faith in that regard. I was staring at a post the other day, just showing you, how many events have taken place for students for liberty, and in South America. In Brazil alone, there was more than 500. It's like, wow. Shows you how popular right now the liberty movement is growing in a country like Brazil. And I think the rest of South America was about 400 or something? That's quite a lot. That's quite significant. Of course, the United States was way in the lead in terms of Students for Liberty, events. That's quite to be expected. And I think in Europe as a whole, it was like 313 or something. It's not bad. It's so it's improving. Yeah, I would expect it to continue to grow. That's what you need, the presence of that. I can't remember what else, but yeah, it's a very positive sign. So, yep. Overall, anyway, folk, I've gone on long enough anyhow. It's over 2 hours and 45 minutes. So, it's been interesting. Thank you for all your comments and everything like that, and the questions. And I hope I covered enough that I could. And I will get around to doing the next video, whatever it's going to be. Okay, Thank you for watching, and of course I shall talk to you later. Cheers.